would prove bold and decisive. He saw that only the complete and utter destruction of the main Allied army under Kutuzov would solve his problems. He could neither advance nor retreat, and only by eliminating Kutuzov's command would the complete victory be his. But as yet, his enemy showed no signs of preparing to fight. Napoleon therefore conceived the second brilliant scheme of the campaign, a series of elaborate deceptions designed to lure the Allies into attacking Napoleon's forces on ground of his own choosing. There he would destroy them utterly. The corps d'armée system allowed Napoleon to trim his army to just 3 corps, those of Soult and Lannes, along with Murat's cavalry reserve. Yet he could still retain the ability to fight a holding battle with a reasonable prospect of success. Altogether, these 3 bodies represented some 53,000, whom Napoleon planned to use as a bait to draw on the superior Russian and Austrian forces of some 87,000 men. Unbeknown to the Allies, waiting nearby were the corps of Bernadotte and Davout, who would have strict orders to join Napoleon as battle commenced, thus bringing his strength up to 75,000 for the actual battle, and bringing the odds far closer together at a time when it would be too late for the Allies to disengage. The mere act of bringing the Allied army to battle was not in itself enough for Napoleon. They must be destroyed completely, and a simple battle of attrition characterized by direct assaults would not prove sufficient. Napoleon needed both a knockout blow and the entrapment of the defeated army. Once again, his military genius would supply the perfect ammunition. The Emperor's plan for the battle, which would eventually be fought on the 2nd of December, relied on 2 factors. Firstly, enticing the enemy to do battle on the field chosen by Napoleon, and secondly, in exposing their centre to a massive counterpunch once battle had been joined. In both of these objectives, Napoleon was to succeed perfectly. However, to ensure that the Allies took the bait, Napoleon set out to foster every impression of weakness in the French army camped around Austerlitz. He sought to give the impression of an army about to embark upon a precipitate retreat. The outlying elements of the French army were camped in a comparatively strong position upon the Pratzen Heights, an area of high ground to the west of the town of Austerlitz. To begin the deception, Marshal Soult was ordered to abandon the town and his favorable position on the Pratzen Heights with every indication of undue haste. The Russians were quick to take the bait, and followed hard on the heels of the apparently disorganized French forces, occupying the Pratzen Heights above Austerlitz by the 1st of December. Allied intelligence seized upon these moves as proof of an impending French retreat. The opinion began to establish itself among the Allied commanders that Napoleon should therefore be brought to battle while he was at his weakest. The first part of Napoleon's scheme had succeeded. The Russians had occupied precisely the ground he wanted them to. As early as the 21st of November, Desaguiers, a member of Napoleon's staff, recorded, "On going back from Wischau, he stopped on the highway about 2 leagues and a half from Brunn, near Versanton, a small mound by the side of the road, a kind of rather abruptly truncated cone, and gave orders that the foot of it should be excavated on the enemy's side so as to increase its escarpment. Then turning off toward the south, he entered a high plain contained between 2 embanked streams running from the north to the southwest. The Emperor slowly and silently went over this newly discovered ground, stopping several times on its most elevated points, looking principally towards Pratzen. He carefully examined all its characteristics, and during this survey turned towards us, saying, 'Gentlemen, examine this ground carefully. It is going to be a battlefield. You will have a part to play on it.' This plain was indeed to be within a few days the field of the Battle of Austerlitz. The town of Austerlitz lay approximately 3 miles to the east of the Pratzen Heights. The Santon, as noted by de Séguier, lay to the northeast of the Soulan, a slightly larger hill of some 850 feet at its peak, which separated the hamlets of La Panse-Markt and Jeschikowitz. From this point, running south along the meandering streams of the Goldblach and the Bossetnitz, were the villages of Puntewitz, Kobelnitz, Sokolnitz, and Telnitz. To the southeast of this last place lay the Satschan Lake and its surrounding marshes, the frozen waters of which would provide Austerlitz with its dramatic and terrible finale. With the Pratzen Heights conceded to the Allies, Napoleon intended to draw the main thrust of the Allied attack towards the apparently weak French right flank, thereby exposing the Allied centre to counterattack. This attack would be made by the Grande Armée, which was withdrawn to an area beyond the Soulan, out of the sight of the Allied forces. Shown here is the initial deployment of the French forces. The Soulan and Santon were defended by the infantry and cavalry of General Lannes and Marshal Muir at the extreme north of the battlefield, while Legrand's men of Soult's corps were positioned to the south, around Kobelnitz. Marshal Soult was also charged with holding the centre right, from Kobelnitz to Sokolnitz, with further units of Legrand's division of his 4th Corps. The late but timely arrival of Marshal Davout meant that his cavalry and leading infantry division could be deployed to the east of Telnitz in support of the all-important right flank. In these positions, the French prepared to do battle on December the 1st.
The only word for the Allied chain of command at Austerlitz is confusion, frankly. There are a whole group of authorities present, and it was very difficult to know who really was in command. Now, nominally, the commander-in-chief, of course, was Kutuzov, heading the joint Austro-Russian army. But he'd been joined over the previous weeks by not one emperor only, but 2 emperors. The Tsar, his own master, had come from St. Petersburg, surrounded by all his staff officers and people of the court who knew very little about military affairs, but believed that they did, of course. And then there was the Emperor Francis I of Austria, with his entourage. And these 3 sort of authorities were continually at odds with one another, or there were varying coalitions being sort of struck between 2 groups against a third.
Granowitz, 2 miles west of Austerlitz, was selected by Allied High Command as the Allied headquarters. There, the Russian Tsar and Austrian Emperor Francis met to agree a battle plan. Despite the difficulties of command, an Allied plan did emerge, which involved a massive thrust through the right of the French line between Telnitz and Sokolnitz. This drive was to be followed by a thrust northwards by 4 huge columns of troops. A simultaneous assault on the French left flank at the Soulan would engage their forces, thereby isolating them, while the areas to the south were secured. To achieve this, however, would mean dividing the Allied army, including nearly 60,000 men given to the command of General Buxhouten, with the task of carrying out the main assault on the French right. In effect, this played straight into Napoleon's hand, as it stripped the Allied centre of men to support a bold move against the French right wing. The older and perhaps wiser men of Allied command were unconvinced. They respected Napoleon's generalship and urged caution. They felt the plan to be hot-headed and overconfident. The Austrian Chief of Staff, General Weyrother, took a particularly high-handed attitude towards his Russian allies and those members of the Austrian staff who did not endorse the plan. In addition, Weyrother's arrogant manner certainly did not endear him to his fellow officers, as General Langeron, whose troops sat atop the all-important Pratzen Heights, remembered. When we had all assembled, General Weyrother arrived, unfolded upon a large table an immense and most accurate map of the environs of Austerlitz, and read the deposition in a loud tone and with a self-satisfied air which indicated a thorough persuasion of his own merit and our incapacity. It really was like a college teacher reading a lesson to young scholars, Kutuzov, seated and half asleep when we arrived, at length fell into a sound nap before we departed. The Tsar was eventually persuaded by his young officers of the soundness of the plan, and it was adopted, thereby launching the Allies unwittingly down the road to defeat. They had been fooled by Napoleon's unforced abdication of the Pratzen Heights. And now, apart from the wary Langeron and Kutuzov, believed the French to be a spent force. In the few seconds it took the Tsar to consent to Weyrother's plan, he effectively sealed the Allied fate. Napoleon was in very good spirits, and sat late into the winter night, surrounded by his men, often deep in thought, brooding upon the coming battle, before sliding off into sleep, fully clothed by his campfire. On December the 1st, the eve of the battle, the French